BBC.
Radio Bristol.
Well, I'm delighted to say I'm joined by the author, Alfred Birney, who's going to discuss his book, The Interpreter from Java. Alfred, thank you so much for joining me on the programme.
Thank you.
And Alfred, I believe you're in the Netherlands at the moment. Is that correct? Whereabouts are you based?
Yeah, I'm in the Hague right now. That's actually where I live.
And Alfred's book, The Interpreter from Java, is a very rich, award-winning novel about identity, about trauma, about colonialism and racism. And we'll talk about the book in detail in a moment, Alfred. Tell us a bit about your background. Of course, you had interesting parents, a Dutch mother, an Indonesian, Chinese, Dutch, Scottish father.
Yes, right.
A real old mixture. But
yeah,
you had a very tricky childhood, didn't you? Just tell me briefly about your early years.
My early years were when I was a kid. I had to cope with a father who was quite paranoid, since he had he was in the war in Indonesia. And what he did there was several things, but he had done many bad things, and he just, like a normal father, telling fairy tales to his children. Instead of that, he told me all about what he has done there, like killing Indonesians and all that, so that's... Well, that's something you don't want to hear, being a child.
Yeah, well, we'll talk more about your father in a moment, but you had such a rough ride as a youngster because you experienced racism and bullying at school, didn't you? What was your school experience like?
Well, yeah, it was quite hard. The Dutch weren't used to have people around here like me, Eurasians. So I myself, I'm partly Dutch, but I look a bit like an Indonesian. So I was a brownie, and it was really a tough time. The teachers and all that. It was not really. Yeah, it wasn't really easy to cope with it. Now the Netherlands is totally a different country, very multicultural, but way back when, in the 50s and 60s, the country was all white. So, that was quite tough for me. And, also when our family... broke. I had to go to boarding schools and all that, but that actually was a better time for me at the boarding school. So I didn't have my father around who would beat me up, all the time. So there were, for me, there were several, let's say, so to speak, enemies. My father was a sort of an enemy. The kids at school, the teachers at school, and so forth. So it was quite tough.
I was reading somewhere that after you left school, you led, for a while at least, a rather bohemian lifestyle. What did you do directly after your education ended?
I simply took my guitar and I went singing and playing on the corners of the street, to give myself a living. And I was living here and there, in all sorts of houses. Sometimes I even had to sleep on the streets or in the parks, and that took quite a while, So, that's another chapter. I don't really write about that in The Interpreter from Java, but yes, that's another part of my life. Yes.
You did teach guitar for a time until you damaged you damaged your hand. What happened to your hand?
It was stupid. I did martial arts, Chinese and Japanese martial arts, and while practicing that, I simply broke a finger, and that was the end of that was at the end of my career as a musician, and then I turned to become a writer. I was 30 then, and 5 years later I had my first novel. That was in 1987, and yeah, from then on I just live. I have my living being a writer, but I couldn't live only by selling books. So although my finger was hurt, I still could. I still was able to teach guitar, and so for many years I've been teaching guitar as well. Yeah, it was a good time actually.
Well,
yeah.
as you mentioned, you've been a serious writer since the late 80s, and you write fiction and non-fiction, often based on your own families and the Dutch Indies history. Prior to that, though, I was reading somewhere that you used to write stories and throw them away. Is that true?
Yes, in the beginning, yes, they were. Yeah, they were too bad to publish. Yes.
Well, these days you write acclaimed books, and in your previous books you've written about your youth, of course dominated by your dad, and your years at boarding school. But your multi-award-winning book, The Interpreter from Java, is now considered a modern classic in Holland, described as a throat-grabbing father-son novel about the colonial past in the Dutch East Indies. And it describes both your parents and their impacts on your life. And we should mention, although it's a fictional novel, it's very much based on the story of your father, isn't it? Yeah,
well, you can call it fiction as well. So it's there are all sorts of facts from his war, and I use that, but I still use the form of the novel since I'm not an historian. I'm not writing like historians do. I aimed for two perspectives: the perspective of the son, who had to cope with such a father, and I simply took the perspective of the father being in the war in Indonesia, and that's what makes the novel something in between fiction and facts. We call that here. How do we call that? We call that. How do you call it? Boy, I forgot the term, sorry, but it's something like fiction.
Now, it's based on the true story of your father's secret life as a war criminal in the Dutch East Indies War with Japan. He worked as an interpreter. Of course, the book is called The Interpreter from Java. He worked as an interpreter during the war with Japan, and your father committed horrific atrocities, didn't he? Just give us an idea of what he did.
Well, he actually started after the Japanese lost the war by these atomic bombs by the Americans. Then my father, he was young, and when the English came, the English they teamed up with the Dutch and the Americans and the Australians. And when the English came into town in Surabaya, my father started being a guide for the English and the Gurkhas. When the English left, the Dutch took over against the Indonesian, revolting Indonesians, and then he became an interpreter. But, like questioning present Indonesians. But after that, and here comes the bad thing, the Dutch gave him a sort of, you just go ahead. And then my father, he turned into a prisoner interrogator, and that was a really bad thing. And after that torturing he did and all that, he was joining the Dutch Marines. The Dutch Marines, they were fighting against the Indonesian army. And even in the end, to make it even more complex, even at the end, my father joined a small group who was striving for an Islamic State, so he could keep on fighting against the Indonesian army. Then he was called back by his Dutch Marines, and he had to flee to the Netherlands because the Indonesians they were after him. You know.
Indeed, they wanted to put him on trial for his war crimes. As you say, he fled to the Netherlands to escape execution, and that was where he met and wed your mother. I presume your mother knew nothing of his past, did she?
Nothing, no, nothing. And I used my mother as a figure in this novel as an example, so to speak, for the Dutch. Because many Dutch people do not know anything about this colonial war between the Netherlands and the Indonesians. You know, we are taught about the Second World War, you know, the German occupation, all that. We all know that. But this particular colonial war in which Holland sent 150,000 troops to Indonesia, they just leave it out of the history books, and that's a bad thing. And here I come, here I just come in with this novel to make an end of this. You know, I think everybody in Holland should know what the Dutch have done, and the Dutch actually. They just took advantage of boys like my father. Remember, my father was only 17, 18, 19, 20 years old. He was a really young man, and he was quite confused, you know. So therefore, he worked. He worked along with the English and the Gurkhas and the Dutch, you know, and the Americans and all that. And it's quite a complex story, but it was, in any case, enough to make this man being totally paranoid when he came to Holland. He was only 25 years old, and he had all these bad things, inside of him.
And very sadly, he sort of renewed this reign of terror on you and your siblings, didn't he?
Yes. That's what the book is about. Yes. Also, so there are two wars. Well, there's the real war, the colonial war in Indonesia, my father, and there he took along with him, of course, his memories, and this war kept on, the war never left his memories, and my father used to be so paranoid in the night, at night when we were asleep. He would often think that Indonesians came to get him, and so he took his dagger and he was, going through the house and lighting, coming into my bedroom. And what do you think when you're 7 years old? You think, oh boy, my daddy is going to stab me, you know. That's so that was the war inside the family. Yeah.
Now, the central character in the book is called Alan Nolan, and in the book he discovers his father's memoirs and begins to understand how the war sort of transformed his father into a monster. How similar is he to you, do you feel?
Yeah, it's quite similar. It's quite similar. Yeah, it's quite my story. What I did with the story of my father may be more fiction, but like how I write about this Alan Nolan. He's just an alter ego of mine. It's quite close to my own experience.
And what actually became of your father? How did he die eventually?
When he became 65, he went to Spain and to the south of Spain to try to start a new life, a third life. So his first life was in Indonesia, his second life was in Holland, and at the end of his life, for 15 years, he lived in Malaga, and there he died.
And
And
did he ever show any contrition, any sort of compassion towards the people that he tortured?
No, no, he kept on believing that he did good things for the Netherlands. You know, my father, he lost his father right before the Second World War. His father was a Dutchman with, you know, all, you know, with different backgrounds, of course. But my father sort of, his father was a sort of a romantic figure for him, and Holland was the place to be for my father. And he had the feeling, you know, I did, I have been fighting for the Dutch, so I need a reward, you know. And but you know, things you know, went just another way, because the Dutch, you know, they simply didn't know anything about this colonial war. But my father, until his dying day, he kept on believing that he just did the good things. Yeah, that's well, that's kind of tragic, you know.
Well, as you mentioned, the book exposes a crucial chapter in Dutch and European history, which was deliberately concealed behind what you call the ideological facade of post-war optimism. And yet, since the book's been published, this has become more widely known. It's been very well acclaimed. You must be pleased with the reaction to the book.
Yes, I'm very pleased. I got 2 literary prizes here in Holland, huge prizes. So it became a bestseller, and it, you know, and after that, the newspapers really started writing up to this very day about this colonial war. So, yeah, this novel has done, well, you know, has turned the tables. You know, when it comes down to historian matters, as a matter of fact. So, yeah, I'm very pleased, and I'm really pleased it's been translated now into English, since everybody, or many people are able to read the book now in all sorts of different countries. So
Indeed, it's been translated by David Doherty, and it's published by Head of Zeus. The book is called The Interpreter from Java. And finally, Alfred, just talking to you and the life that you've been through over the years, you seem remarkably well balanced these days.
Oh yes, yes I am. Yeah. It has been a hard or a tough time for me, but finally, yes, I just, you know, I lead a normal life now, you know. Well, being a novelist, you know, it's another life then, you know, compared to the ones who go to their job every day. But I'm fine. Yeah, I'm really fine.
Well, congratulations on the success your book has had already and will continue to have. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you very much.
There you go. That's the writer Alfred Birney, and that book, newly translated into English, The Interpreter from Java. It's an award-winning book published in Holland initially, and based, of course, on Alfred's own father and his own relationship with his father. It's published on the 24th of September by Head of Zeus.